So, Kubernetes and the open source cloud native movement is absolutely massive. But why? Well, here's the story of how a secret project from Google became a catalyst for a global movement spanning millions of users, over 140,000 active contributors, and more than a few deeply opinionated people. And I'm going to share with you the 5 key takeaways that you can use to build your own movement and community. And definitely stick around to the end of the video, because the 5th takeaway, well, that's really, really important. All right, so let's wind back the clock. Because in the early 2000s, Google was having some pretty major problems efficiently managing its huge infrastructure. To solve this, Google engineers developed an internal system, rather hilariously called Borg, that managed thousands of jobs across many different servers. Borg was really important for Google scaling its operations, but it remained an internal tool. Now, Google engineers Joe Bader, Brendan Burns, and Craig McCluskey, they decided it would be awesome to have an open source version of Borg for the broader developer community. So, in 2015, Google contributed Kubernetes to the newly announced Cloud Native Computing Foundation, more commonly referred to as the CNCF. Now, the CNCF, which was formed under the Linux Foundation, aimed to further cloud-native technology and align the tech industry on its future, and to create a bunch of software that anyone and everybody could use. Over the course of my career, I've worked with hundreds of different companies in helping them to build vibrant communities, and there is one critical requirement that is absolutely essential for success. And this leads to our first takeaway. You have to have a project or product that people like and that solves a clear problem. Kubernetes was remarkably well positioned for this. The sheer growth of the internet and the rise of social media, streaming services, and more was really pushing the limits of traditional data centers, and managing these massive applications was an utter fucking nightmare, leading to a lot of emotional eating, weird internet searches, and overconsumption of Mountain Dew from our engineering friends. The ability to automate complex processes and efficiently manage containerized applications lit a fire under the backside of Kubernetes, and it kicked off its rapid adoption. And this is the important thing to remember. Kubernetes was a real chunk of runnable code, but bundled with a promise that we could improve this code together. Oh, and real quick before we go on, if you're new around here, my name is Jono, and I've helped hundreds of companies and thousands of people build engaging online and in-person communities with less hassle and better results. But let's get back to the story. Now, while we're talking about Kubernetes here, you don't actually have to be open source to build an amazing community. Lego, Fitbit, Asana, Harley-Davidson, and many others have done this with proprietary software and products. But what is required is that you have a product that actually solves a problem for your audience. And don't even think about building a community unless you've got a minimum viable product that's out there. And if you're struggling to dog food your own product, well, go fix that before you build a community. Now, what's important to remember here is that coming up with a cool idea for a, quote, project or product that people like and that solves a clear problem is only one part of the problem. Joe Bader, Brendan Burns, and Craig McCluskey did exactly that. But key to Kubernetes success was that it could also stand on its own 2 feet. And this leads to my second takeaway, that you need to enable an ecosystem. So the need to build an ecosystem is where the role of the CNCF really came in. The Linux Foundation, which the CNCF is part of, has had a long history of enabling a sustainable commercial ecosystem around different open source projects. And the only way Kubernetes could survive and thrive is if there were multiple companies all over the world who would contribute code, documentation, translations, and more to the project. Now, some of you, my arch-using LWN reading pals, might thumb your noses at the role of commercial participation in open source. But we have to trade in, well, the reality of open source today, which is that the vast majority of open source code is created by engineers who are being paid by companies to write it. Now, does this mean that we should require people to work at companies to contribute open source? Of course not. Part of what makes open source so special is that you don't need to work at a company to have a profound impact on the world. But I reject the notion that company contributions are somehow bad or suboptimal for open source. These companies have funded hundreds of millions of lines of free open source code that has enabled individuals and businesses all over the world to do amazing things. And these companies have also enabled millions of developers to do what they love, building free open source code while also supporting their families and having nice lives. This is a good thing, not a bad thing. But creating a thriving commercial ecosystem where often competing companies can all frolic in the same ball pit, well, that's a mental image, and ensuring that it's a level playing field so early stage companies as well as multinational corporations can all participate, well, this is no mean feat. And the CNCF, their leadership, their employees, and thousands of community contributors all over the world have made this possible. And it goes without saying. A special shout out to Dan Khan, who led the CNCF for so many years. And I know I'm not alone when I say I miss him dearly. So Kubernetes was off to a great start, and eager companies and their engineers were rolling up their sleeves and building reams and reams of code together. But this can lead to a bit of a risk. because when something becomes important and popular, like Kubernetes, there can be a temptation to frame it as something of a panacea, as a solution to all the world's technology ills. And this leads me to takeaway number 3, that acceptance of fragility leads to better results. Now, before I go on, I'm actually going to be fragile with you right now and share that I would love if you could like this video because it really does help the channel out a lot. Now, back in those early days, setting up and managing Kubernetes clusters was a giant, monumental South Park Season 1, Episode 1 pain in the ass. It required deep knowledge of container management, network setup, storage, and security, and early adopters kind of struggled to pull these deployments together. There was significant risk with this because Kubernetes isn't a simple application, and poorly configured containers, weak network policies, or outdated images can lead to serious data leaks and breaches. But this is where the true magic of open source really comes together, in identifying, discussing, and fixing problems rapidly, but with one important caveat: when its participants can speak and engage frankly and solve problems openly. You see, part of what makes open source and communities more broadly so impactful is that we build real human connections, and intimacy, mental, not physical intimacy between humans occurs when we have the ability to change each other. Just think about a colleague you may have had where they don't listen to a word that you say, and compare them to another colleague that's open and receptive to your ideas. Which one do you feel closer to? Now, this might seem like a nuanced point, but it's really important because from day one, the open source cloud native community was very open about their successes and very open about their failures. This resulted in rapid innovation. Issues could be identified, discussed out in the open, and code would start flowing. And if that code didn't solve it, then other code would. And this worked because, unlike some commercial companies, there wasn't some PR flack sipping on their goat milk double half-calf cappuccino, quote, managing the message. The message was already out there, and the community came together with a mindset of fixing the problem, not fixing the message. This is really important because when you build a community, a project, or a company, there's a tendency to want to control the message because even though business books tell us that vulnerability is strength, actually putting that into practice can be really hard because we fear the consequences of people taking advantage of our vulnerabilities. But the benefits of being vulnerable and getting better results while building closer connections far outweighs the risks. We've talked a lot about Kubernetes, but this is really only one part of the story because the open source cloud native community goes way, way, way beyond Kubernetes. Over the years, countless projects have been added into the community, including Argo, Cilium, Cloud Events, Containerd, Core DNS, Envoy, Falco, and many others. And this leads us to our 4th takeaway. Diversity of people and ideas is absolutely critical. Kubernetes was kind of like the kindling for a huge bonfire, and its initial success led lots of companies to want to contribute their projects to the community. Now, this in turn created a challenge. How do you ensure that 1, the projects that you bring in are the ones that will have the most impact on your users, and 2, how do you ensure a level of quality, especially given how critical this infrastructure is and how devastating bugs, defects, and security problems can be? The solution to this problem was an elegant process where projects could go through 3 different phases of maturity that broadly map to the crossing the chasm chart. Now, I know crossing the chasm, don't worry, I'm not going to turn this into a TED Talk. All right, so sandbox projects are primarily designed for early adopters, where if something breaks, well, you get to keep both pieces. Incubating projects, though, are more durable, and they're designed for the early majority to consider putting into production. And graduating projects are intended to be rock solid, dependable, and ready for wide-scale use. Now, this process is guided by rigorous criteria for each of the 3 different phases, and there are community governance bodies that make decisions to ensure that the process not only works, but also that it's fair and accessible to everyone. And this is the key point. Look, the criteria to become a graduated project is hardcore. But the playing field is level and accessible to everybody. It's going to require a lot of work, but everybody is welcome into the tent. And importantly, it also means that success isn't just defined by shipping great technology, but also ensuring that that project is sustainable in the community too. This is genius. It creates a level playing field for technology to prosper while injecting deep into the veins of these projects a core need for effective community and open collaboration. And this is kind of the spirit of the CNCF and the open source cloud native community, that the diversity of projects, people, and ideas really makes everything tick. The open source cloud native community has a vast range of contributions, including a diverse range of people from all over the world. These folks write code, do translations, create docs, run events, perform marketing, provide mentoring, create collateral, produce content, and much more. And this has all led to 142,000 contributors from 189 countries all participating. Socks have been suitably rocked off in all of this. Now, this has not been without its challenges. Over the years, there have been fiery debates about how the community works and the role of the CNCF in that community. While the vast majority of this discourse has been civil and respectful, there is a tiny smattering of people who've been rude, condescending, and disrespectful, which, irrespective of the topic, is never okay. We have to operate on a foundation of courtesy, even when we vehemently disagree. Otherwise, we replace the opportunity to actually solve problems with merely trading barbs or just wanting to shut the conversation down and make it go away. But oddly, this is actually a clear indicator of the success of the open source cloud native community. It shows that people really care deeply about the community, who it serves, how it serves them, and how it enables others to be successful in the community. In other words, people get this passionate because the community is something so valuable to them that they fear losing what they have. Now, this doesn't justify antisocial behavior. Far from it. It's absolutely unacceptable. But it does explain it. So, over 120 projects, over 142,000 contributors, spanning a global community of developers, docs writers, translators, community managers, and more. If you want to build something like this, you should definitely check out our community leadership core. We provide one-on-one coaching and accountability. It's all tailored directly to you and your company, and it helps you to work faster and smarter and generate measurable community engagement and growth every single month. Go and check out the link down there where you can find out more. Now, all of this leads us to our final and most important takeaway, that to build a movement, you need to enable a marketplace of ideas. There is an odd power dynamic in communities. When a brand new community forms, we see the people responsible for it, such as the leaders and the community managers, the DevRel people, as the people who make the decisions, and we follow their lead. Now, this is problematic because it inhibits the ability for the community to truly serve the actual needs of the target audience. But why? Well, because the only way a community can be successful is when the community members are not only consumers of the community, but they're also taking a fundamental responsibility for that community's success too. In other words, if a community fails, it isn't just because the 1 or 2 or 3 people who've been paid to grow it failed. It's because we let it fail. It is our shared failure. From day one, the open source cloud native community has fostered a shared power dynamic. It has made it clear that it can only succeed if we all make it succeed. And the CNCF and others have created governance structures, guidelines, and more to provide clear pathways in which everyone can play a meaningful role in its success. Now, are these structures and systems perfect? Of course not. No human structures or systems are perfect. And if you expect them to be, well, you're fooling yourself. But I think it's undeniable that the way the CNCF and the broader community have been able to self-organize such a large, diverse global collection of contributors and not only create and publish hundreds of projects, but also enable the formation of hundreds of companies and enable the careers of hundreds of thousands of people, well, it's undeniable to me that this is a resounding success. And what I love most about this is that there's a real sense of family in the open source cloud native world. Lifetime friendships have been forged. New ideas and challenges to our existing assumptions have been proffered. People from different backgrounds, perspectives, and worldviews have come together around this shared passion. And this is the reason why I myself have been so passionate about building communities for the last 26 years. When we design the right model for people to come together and collaborate, it has a very real, tangible impact on our lives and a very intangible but equally powerful impact on our relationships. But do you know what really excites me? We are only just scratching the surface of figuring out how to build these communities. We really are in the stone age of the art and science of community building, and every year we become leaner, more effective, and wiser in how we do this work well. All right, so you might want to build your own movement around a project, product, or service, and there are 5 ingredients that are absolutely essential in doing this well. If you go and click on this video over here, I'm going to walk through each of these 5 ingredients and give you some super concrete next steps on how to implement them. Now, this is super important because if you don't have these ingredients, you may build something and waste a ton of time, money, and generate a whole bunch of heartache for yourself. So go check that out, and I'll see you in the video.